We've talked about The Thing. We've talked about Prince of Darkness. So let's talk about In the Mouth of Madness and close out this Apocalypse trilogy. This stars Sam Neill, Jurgen Progno, Julie Carmen, and a whole host of characters that I'll talk about in a short while. This was directed, of course, by John Carpenter, being part of the Apocalypse trilogy, but it was actually written by Michael DeLuca, who actually passed it around earlier on, including to Carpenter, who initially passed on the project. Fortunately, DeLuca did not give up, and I'm so glad he didn't, because that meant that Carpenter eventually acquiesced, and we got this. Which was probably a good idea, because they do mock Stephen King, and Carpenter and King are friends, I believe, so that maybe helped smooth that over. But like I say, this is such a great cast in it. David Warner as the Doctor, who is an absolute treasure. John Glover, who I think the first thing I remember seeing him in was Brimstone, when I was younger, which is about the devil sending a guy out to get people back into hell who've escaped. He was the devil in that, and absolutely brilliant. Also great in Gremlins 2, of course, but that's the thing I mostly remembered him for. Frances Bay doing her I'm a sweet old woman and then I'm a creepy old woman act, because she can do both so well, and I'll maybe talk more about that in a short while. Charlton Heston, who is forever tainted by Ralph Garman's impression. Every time I see him now, I hear that, Thanks for that, Ralph Garman. Peter Jason in the opening scene, and I'll talk more about him when I get there, but of course he is also in Prince of Darkness. He's kind of like a connecting thread to that. And whilst not necessarily a great actor, one worthy of mention, Wilhelm von Homburg playing Simon, who isn't actually that bad in this. He wasn't bad at all, but the issue with this guy, born Norbert Gruppe, and with a career in wrestling and boxing prior, he had quite a reputation. He was not a nice guy by any stretch of the imagination, but I wanted to mention it mainly because this was his last film appearance. About 5-6 years later, he did his last ever appearance in a TV show, but this was his last actual film, so I wanted to at least mention it, even though he was a bit of a douche. And yes, Max von Sydow actually did the dubbing for him in Ghostbusters, the film as well as the game. And he wasn't happy with that, of course. There is one other actor I want to talk about, but I'll do that towards the end. But this does borrow a lot from both Stephen King, of course, and Lovecraft. The fact that it's a New England town that seems so quiet and normal and peaceful, and then everything goes a bit wrong, I think is very much a big part of both of those oeuvres. But I think one of the greatest things it lists from Lovecraft is the framing device. We enter with John Trent being dragged in, screaming, "I'm not insane," and then of course he tells the story to the Doctor. In a lot of Lovecraft's work, we have someone telling a story of something that happened, and then they'll tell it in flashback, and then we'll come back at the end for like the moral or some kind of denouement or whatever. And that's what this does. Or sometimes it's a journal. But that's what this does. We start with that, and then we see what led him to that point, and then we come back for the closing and one of the greatest endings to a film, I think, ever. But when he's in there, obviously he's talking to David Warner, like I said before, and we get the first indication of who John Trent was initially, and this is where Peter Jason comes in, because we see him pull down this guy who's tried to commit insurance fraud. That's what he does. He's a freelance fraud investigator. And we see a rational, pragmatic, by-the-book, sensible, independent, knows his own mind kind of guy. He's analytical, he understands what's going on, he's very sceptical, he will not believe anything at face value. He always has to delve deeper. This is exactly the kind of person you want to show in a film of someone losing their mind. Because if you just show just a general person, just an everyday Joe, who maybe believes a couple of things about astrology or something, it's not such a big slide. And I'm not saying anything about those people negatively, I'm just saying you want polar opposites when you're doing something like this. You want to see the biggest drop. This is why the Joker has the obsession with Batman, because Batman has this facade of, I'm the greatest detective, although that kind of isn't true if you look deeper, but I'm not getting into that. This isn't about that. But he's got this facade, and the Joker just wants to break that down, because what better than to break down the most rational, cold person into something like the Joker? And that's what this film is great for. I love it because it shows such a big slide. And like I say, Peter Jason's character instrumental in selling that. As well as later on, he's talking about the fact that I know my own mind, no one's pulling my strings, when he finds out later that he's in fact being written, it doesn't quite work out that way, does it? He's not pulling his own strings. And again, that's such a bigger thing, such a bigger impact for someone who really thought they were totally in control of their lives to learn that they're not. So of course, he's sent on this quest with Styles, played by Julie Carmen, and she's great. I've not seen her in much, to be honest. I think there's things I've probably seen her in but not really realised it's her, maybe. But I think she does well. She starts as the do I have to go along? She really doesn't want to work with this guy. But then, of course, is written as the seductress by Sutter Kane. And, we start to see how this quaint town maybe isn't all it's cracked up to be. Of course, they're trying to get in, and there's the kid on the bike who rapidly ages. She's driving at night, and then all of a sudden you're in a wooden tunnel bridge, and you're in daylight in the town of Hobbs End, which doesn't appear on any map and shouldn't exist. Crazy. You would think, what the heck's going on? Of course, Sam Neill's asleep all the time, and he's like, oh, morning already. Well, no, it isn't. Not that much time has probably passed. But we see this town, and there's little moments like the picture, but mostly it's quite quiet and placid. There's the joke about the wrong side because he misremembered the town layout. But they go to the church and see the group come up to try and rescue Simon's son Johnny, who's being taken by Sutter Kane. But this is where the sickness of the town really starts. We start to get that thread. And from then on, it just gets worse and worse and worse. We see the children running, trying to chase down animals, and just being generally uncomfortable and evil and twisted and horrible to look at. We see the people in the town slowly succumbing. Like I said before, Frances Bay, when we first meet her, is a darling. She's like a bit addled, but not too bad. And, we have that moment where it's like, this is meant to be the woman who apparently chopped her husband into coleslaw. But then we see her the next day, and she's got him chained to her ankle, and she's really starting to get the town's sickness. And slowly but surely the town descends, with Trent the only one who seems to be fighting against it in a meaningful way. Maybe also Simon. But he's trying his best. And there's the whole, insanity is repeating the same action over and over moment with the car loop before he realises, I've got to drive through the group. There's no way out of it. But of course we get to meet Sutter Kane. And I can't imagine anyone but Jurgen Progno playing this guy. There is something creepy about him, yes. But there's also a lot of charisma. This is a guy who I want to hear more from. I want him to tell me what's going on. Even if he's telling me that in fact he's writing everything I'm doing and nothing I'm doing is in my control. In fact, the only reason I want to hear more from him is because he's written me to want to hear more from him. It starts to really mess with your brain if you think about it too long. But there's so much there in this character. And it's a shame that Jurgen Progno has never really had those big roles. I think maybe people find him a bit too creepy, but I'm comfortable with creepy, I don't know. But he's great in this. I can't imagine anyone else doing it quite as well, to be honest. That is obviously, a lot of times you'll say that probably in films because you're used to that character being played by that person. But I really can't think of anyone else in that place who would have worked so well. He does it so well, and like I say, he's great. And of course we have the whole thing of, the reveal that, yes, Sam Neill, as John Trent, has to go out and send the manuscript into the world. This book has to be made so that the world can be made ready for the old ones. And we see a not too bad effect, to be honest, given the time. The tearing, there's a moment that's a bit wonky, a bit wobbly, but for the most part, it's not too bad at all. The big tear open that Sutter Kane does, to let the creatures through as they try to escape. And of course, the creatures have to have a quick nod, because the special makeup effects in this were, of course, created by the Holy Trinity of Nicotero, Berger, and Kurtzman. And some of it obviously does look a bit hokey now, granted, because technology's surpassed what it could do then. But at least they didn't try and make them all digital, which would have been terrible in '94. So I respect that, and I could see what they were trying to do. And they did try and keep as much of it in shadow as possible to make it, sell a lot better. But of course we have him come back, and this is where I want to talk about that actor, because this is the film debut of Hayden Christensen as the Paperboy. I feel sorry for this guy, I really do, because his career, I think, was really thrown a curveball by people's reactions to the prequel trilogy of Star Wars. But he's fine as a paperboy in this. You know, it's not his debut. He'd done a couple of TV things before, but this was his start. If you will, he's like the counterpoint to Wilhelm von Humberg in this, you could argue, which is a thought I never had until I just recorded it now. So, but yeah, I just wanted to quickly mention that if you ever wondered where Hayden Christensen started, it was right here, at least in the film sense. But of course he goes back, he's told that, you know, Styles was never with him, and we close out him telling this story to David Warner's character, and everything just seems like, yeah, he's just crazy, there's no hope. So all of a sudden, everything goes literally to hell. I'm not going to cover up that word, because that's kind of what happens. And he stumbles out and realises that yes, there's a film of it, he's going to watch it, and we see moments from the film, and suddenly, whilst he'd kind of snapped before, he'd kind of lost it to a degree. Watching the film, showing things that he's experienced, I think was the absolute last moment. That hysterical moment at the end is the final straw. At the end of the film, John Trent has fully passed through the mouth of madness. He's now in it fully. And I love this film. I'm really glad it's found its audience and critics have warmed to it. They understand now what it was trying to do, and maybe it's just the world is more ready for an apocalypse, awful as that sounds. But if you've never seen this or any of the others, watch the trilogy. It's spooky season, it's part of why I'm doing this. And just, you know, let yourself go, let yourself enjoy the fact that the world is bad, yes, right now, but at least it's not quite this bad. So I'll be back next time with something very different. This is not going to be anything like what's happening next time, but maybe the week after we'll return to a Lovecraftian style cosmic horror, maybe also with Sam Neill. But I hope you join me for both of those things and whatever happens after. But as always, thank you for watching and take care. And remember, you're just a character in a book.